strategic masking, create this multi-layered, brightly colored project from these simple inkjet printouts. I used primarily craft paints that my sons got me for Father's Day, including a glow-in-the-dark craft paint that I've never tried before. And so stay tuned to the end and you can see if it all works out. I was really surprised by the results. I want to take you step by step through this. First, I want to try to plan everything out, and I cut a sheet of paper to match about the size, dimensions of the gel plate. And I've got my inkjet printouts here, and I'm trying to strategically orient them how I want it to look on the plate. Now, the important thing for the inkjets is that you must use double-sided glossy paper, brochure paper, and I'll include a link to that in the description. This is what I find that works for me. And I also want to let you know that you've got to realize that how you set this up in your planning, you're going to be turning it over face down. And so it's going to have to be the opposite of what you would expect, the opposite orientation. I'm going for a pop art type of feel for this. And so you take your inkjet printouts and you're going to put them down face down onto the gel plate and give a gentle but firm pressure to even the pressure to be able to transfer that image onto the gel plate. Remember, this is the exact opposite scenario than if you were using laserjet transfers, which is where you actually put down paint on the gel plate first, and then the laserjet image repels and leaves some of the paint behind. Here, you're actually transferring the ink from the inkjet printer directly to the, not directly, but you're transferring it onto the plate. Throughout the step-by-step process, I'm going to show you how I use different strategies or different ways that I mask different parts of the plate at different times in order to get the brightly colored effect that I wanted to get. Okay, and one of the first things that I'm going to need to mask is the face. This is one of my son's faces, because I don't want the polka dot that I'm going to be putting on this plate to go across his face. So I want to try this glow-in-the-dark paint just to see if it's going to work. I've never used it before, and I'm not a paint snob on projects like this. So I'm going to protect his face by leaving the paper on for the time being. Then I'm going to use a stencil with this glow-in-the-dark acrylic paint to create just spots, just to help give it a little point of interest later on, should they want to turn off the light and see it glow in the dark. Plus, they think it's really cool, and that's really what this is all about. I know that there are people that really balk at using craft paint on projects. This is not a project that I'm going to be selling. This is a project just for practice and for bonding with my sons, and so I think it's perfectly fine to use craft paint. You can see the glow-in-the-dark spots, okay? And so that's already looking pretty cool. Now I'm going to do reverse painting on the comic burst bubble. It says Dad on it, and so I want to use a really vivid blue on the lettering with a bright yellow for the actual burst around it, because that contrast is going to help it really pop and give it that pop art feel, for lack of a better word there. I know that some have mentioned to me before that they've had issues with the paper that they use for masking items, leaving a residue on their gel plate. And with this double-sided brochure paper, I've never had that issue so far, and I've left it on there probably for up to a couple of hours. I'm not going to do that here in this project, just because in a moment you'll see me take off the paper. So now let's carefully remove the brochure paper that's been masking my son's image. And it's turned out really well here. I do want to go ahead, excuse me, and add paint over his image in order to protect it from whenever I'm going to put on the brightly colored layers. Now, you have to remember, whatever you paint on first, this is reverse painting. So whatever you're going to paint on first is actually going to be the top or the front of your final project. And I've created an off-white color here by mixing up some, actually it's like a silver with titanium white, because I don't have a good color that I wanted to use, and so I'm just going to mix it up to myself with my palette knife. And I love using my palette knife with my gel plate. Okay, I'm doing more reverse painting here to have that yellow come out, and it really is going to make the letter stand out for the word dad. And here it's just this comic burst bubble that I really like to use. It does look like a comic book or from pop art, and it just really helps it stand out in the end, in the final project. If you stay tuned, you'll be able to see that. My sons really like that comic book pop art of the American pop art feel and style. I mean, some of it may have to do with their age, but it's just also their preference. My sons are aged 8, 7, and 2, and it's just a lot of fun to do things like this with them and do projects. And I get their input on some of these projects as well, and they ask me to make things for them. And this is one way to bond and to be there with them. And they're going to grow up before you know it. Now here's the next step in the strategic masking. Okay, I'm actually using just this cardstock. It's not particularly stiff. I think it's about an 85-pound weight, but I'll look that up and try to include a link for it in the description if I find that. But I wanted to give this kind of a wacky, blobby image that's roughly the same length as the phrasing, but it's not going to cover it all the way. And that way it just really gives it some interest here. And so I just laid the cardstock with the blobby, portion cut out. And I just used that with an X-Acto knife to cut that out. I laid that over the gel plate. And this is after the white paint has already dried. So that way I don't have to worry about it removing, any other layer. And then I just squirt the paint I'm going to use directly onto the paper or into the stencil area itself, the mask area itself. Now you may need to vary the size of the brayer that you use. So as you see here, I'm using a small 2-inch brayer versus the 4-inch or 8-inch that I more frequently use when I have the larger gel plate or the gel plate as a whole. In this way, I don't accidentally get carried away and go outside the masked area. And here's the third section, and this time I'm going to use a bright green to be that complement, the complementary color of the pinks that were used earlier. You can see the glow-in-the-dark if you look at the little dots from the glow-in-the-dark acrylic paint. Now what I notice eventually is that when it dries from the other side, it's not quite that obvious. And so it's going to be really cool to look at this in the dark to see if it really pops out. One nice thing with gel plating is you can always flip it over and kind of look to get an idea of how it's going and how all the orientation is and everything. Just be careful not to put your hand in any wet paint. Now that this is dried, I want to now look into putting the background color, but I don't want that background color to overwhelm these bright colors. So I'm going to use like a sky blue, a bright sky blue. So I'm going to take the portions of the cardstock that I cut out to make the mask and strategically place it over the areas that I've already painted. And that way it's going to preserve the integrity of that bright pink and green. And I guess it's technically magenta color. Now, if these move, which they do move a little bit as I go along, I actually kind of like that, because in the end, it's going to give it almost a three-dimensional shadow kind of, see, there it is, kind of effect, to where it doesn't match up quite exactly. And so you're going to get a little bit of that color theory going on, where maybe it's a slight purple from the mixing of the green and the blue. I know at this point it does not look pretty. Just trust the process. It will work out in the end. I'm using one of my favorite papers now, and that's this wet strengthened tea bag paper. I'll be honest, I'm not sponsored by this paper company, but should they reach out to me, I will gladly endorse them. The first time I used that paper, it did not work well. And that's when I realized that, where I live is very hot and humid, and so I needed to give it more time to fully dry before I try to do a peel. Now, for the final pull layer, I'm mixing some titanium white with the clear acrylic matte medium. And the reason why is I don't want the white to overpower everything. And then secondly, what I've noticed is this acrylic medium makes such a great adhesive backing for trying to pull multiple layers at once. And so you're going to put down this paper on top of the acrylic matte medium titanium white mixture, and you're going to put this side of the paper that feels like a tea bag down. And again, just carefully put even pressure throughout. And then I like to put I like to put a heavy book. I got this big book that I put on top of it. I'm going to leave it there for probably, I think it's about 20 to 30 minutes, just to give it a really good pressure. Then I take the book off and I let it dry, and I let this thing dry for probably 2 hours before I've tried to do the pull. I prefer to pull from the gel, from the paper on these type of experiments or projects versus the paper from the gel. I mean, it's looking great. I mean, look at that, it really pops. And you can see under the B the word there, there's a slight purple lining to it. And it's just, I really like that. That's where there was just a little bit of, where the register was just a little off. And so that way we got some of that color theory going on. And I like that look. Makes it, you can tell it's, custom and it's home, it's handmade. There it is. Now I do want to do some lining on this. I'm going to cut the paper from around it, and then I'm going to just take some black ink and to help outline the different blobs in the picture for the final pull. So my sons love glow in the dark things, and so they bought some of this craft paint that was glow in the dark that I've tried here. And so if you stay tuned in just a moment, I'm going to turn the lights out just to see if does it work and how well does it work. And it's actually pretty cool. There we go. Look at that. There's the big splots. And this is the final project. I hope that you really like this, and be sure to hit like and subscribe and spread the word. Have a great day. Thanks.